is rather rich from a Prime Minister to come out condemning the PM proposals as populist, when the last time he spoke about foreigners who are singing in a boat telling them that Malta's full up.
Joe Giglio, thank you very much for being with me here today. You recently came up with 6 proposals to improve national security, including the immediate deportation of foreigners who break the law. Well, what needs to change in the law exactly? Because deportations are already taking place.
In fact, if you see the proposal correctly, we are basically explained the issue that Identity Malta is sleeping over here because, as you rightly point out, the law is already there and it is already, but it is not being adequately enforced. In fact, however, the gist of the proposals relates to law enforcement in general and to strengthening our enforcement agencies, including, therefore, Identity Malta, including the immigration police, including the police, and also our institutions. This is what the focus is on. We are desperately in need of upgrading law enforcement. There is a general feeling, and I think you can agree with me, that there is a general feeling that in actual fact, the things that are happening around us are such that are making us feel less safe.
You also mentioned the army. You said they should have a more active role to play in law enforcement.
Way back, you might recall, I don't know if you might recall, way back the army had a role which related a lot to drug trafficking, and they used to organize roadblocks. They used to help in the enforcement of our laws. And one could create, as in actual fact, the idea would be that a unit within the army itself which could also help over here. People try to spin it around in a different way, that we're going back to today's, but it's absolutely not the case. If we have a situation, for example, where till we beef up our police force, till we find new recruits, unfortunately we are not finding enough recruits to fill up for the needs of which the police have, we could possibly also use other entities, like the army, to help in law enforcement.
But like to break up fights on the streets?
No, there are various duties. I gave you an example, for example. I gave you an example of the issue of roadblocks, the issue of helping out when we are, for example, doing surveillance, as they used to do, in cases related to drug trafficking. This used to happen before, in the past. One won't expect the army to be doing that, no, but to take over some of those duties which fall on enforcement agencies who at the moment cannot cope.
Should the police be better armed?
Yes, of course, they should be better armed. As you are well aware, there is a lack of the use of taser guns, there is a lack of... The police force in general is going through a very difficult time. Now, we are not saying that they should be better armed in order to use arms, but only to feel that they can, in actual fact, resort to these issues whenever they feel threatened. We also do not just arm them, we also need to educate them. We also need to train them. We also need to give them what the police academy ought to be giving them, which is today not functioning in the way like it used to before, how to use them, how to deal with people, how to deal with reports, how to deal with people who are coming over, telling them that they have an issue here or there. In general, we have a program which was laid out by Commissioner Gaffa, which was a 4-year program which was intended to help and boost the police force, but unfortunately we are not seeing the adequate results.
Robert Abela said your proposals are sensationalist and populist.
It's rather rich. It's rather rich from a person who from a populist government who was in actual fact following in the footsteps of his predecessor. The last time Robert Abela told us something about foreigners was when he told us that Malta was full up, where boats were sinking in the Mediterranean. So it's rather rich that Robert Abela comes out with a statement like that.
But you know him on a personal level, right? Like you were his witness at his weddings a few years ago.
It's totally relevant. You rise above that. We have roles to play. We rise above these occasions. It doesn't mean that if I am your friend or if you are my friend, you do not criticize me if you have to criticize me. We might be acquaintances, might have worked together, but you rise above that. And each and every one of us has the moral fiber to ensure that we rise above these situations.
Is he your
And
friend?
Sorry?
Is he your friend?
Well, of course, we know each other socially, just like many other people are our friends, but does it make a difference? Does it mean that we should shy away from criticism? Does it mean that if something is not correct, we should close our eyes to it? Does friendship mean that you do not carry out your role as you are duty-bound to carry out your role? What has this got to do with it? There's absolutely no connection with this. Aren't you friends with people? Does it mean that you shy away from criticizing them if you have to criticize them? Does it mean that if you are a friend with someone who I don't know the level of friendship that you might have, if you think is doing something incorrect, you are going to shut your eyes to that? I'm sure you won't do that, Tim, and neither would I.
I suppose it will depend on the level of friendship you might have with a person. If you
No, I think it is totally irrelevant. If you have a role to play, you should rise above it.
and this is what you're doing with the Prime Minister, basically.
Well, I just have explained it is rather rich from a Prime Minister to come out condemning the PM proposals as populist, when the last time he spoke about foreigners who are singing in a boat telling them that Malta's full up. I think it is rather rich. You know what I know? As a fact, I think that he is not realizing the frustrations on each and every one of us. He is not realizing the situations that we are facing each and every day. He has no credibility, with all due respect, to speak about law and order when we have a situation of a demotivated police force. Less officers who are going on strike. We had massive problems in our prisons. We have massive problems in our law courts. We have delays in our law courts. We have systems that are outdated. So with all due respect, when it comes to law and order and implementing justice, I think Robert Sabella's credibility is equivalent to his predecessors.
So back to your proposals. You said that the criminal code is centuries
Oh
old.
my God, 1854.
It should be rewritten. It's 1854.
We are working on a pattern that was modeled in 1854. It doesn't work anymore.
But which specific parts
Yes.
of it are outdated?
Yes, the specific parts that are outdated are the issue which relates to the compilation of evidence, how the compilation of evidence takes place in the case of the more serious crimes. We have a situation whereby the file of a case can keep on going and coming from the Attorney General's office and back endlessly, without any time limits, without any time frames. Now, the government has told us and has been telling us that he is drawing up proposals on this. This has been coming up since the time when Edward Summit Lewis was Minister of Justice. Another acquaintance of mine, just to go back to his fiction, doesn't mean that you don't criticize him. He has been telling us, Edward Summit Lewis, that he had this coming up for ages. We have a new Minister of Justice now. 5 months we have been with this new Minister of Justice. I asked a parliamentary question as to where it is going, who is heading it, and the replies I got is that they are still working on it. Now we have been crying out, and people who go to court and people who touch and experience court are crying out for the need to change. Even people who work in court, even judges and magistrates are crying out for this model to be refurbished from A to Z.
So this model is the Rinvigi.
Bravo. It is the Rinvigi system of a file coming and going from the Attorney General's office. Today it makes even no more sense. Why does it make no more
Because the
sense?
Attorney General is in the courtroom.
So they have introduced an amendment that the Attorney General can be in the courtroom. So what sense does it make that every month we have to send the file to him and then he has a whole month sitting on it and then sending it back? It's there with us.
What about transparency of court sittings to the general public? Do you agree with that some major court cases should be televised live to the public?
Yes, why not? I mean, court proceedings are open to the public and the public can always go and see court proceedings. It is in very rare instances, which are laid down by the law, where the court can order that a proceeding is held behind closed doors. But that is the exception and not the rule. So televising will be pushing further towards transparency. But court proceedings, as a rule, are public in nature, and therefore there is nothing wrong to televising if they believe that televising would create more transparency. Yes, of course. Then who is this minister? Have you sent for him? Have you spoken to him? Have you investigated him?
A recent case that you're involved in involves the case of 3 Transport Malta officials who who have been charged with allegedly helping people cheat to pass their driving theory test.
Yes, in fact, I am representing a clerk who was receiving instructions from his superiors, who in turn was receiving instructions from his ministers. And my reply to that question is that we cannot make scapegoats to fight corruption. People cannot abuse their position of power to create sacrificial lambs. We have to strive, and it is my duty also as a lawyer, and of each and every one of us as citizens of this country, to ensure that justice is served on whoever is responsible. But please, let us create sacrificial lambs. Let us create scapegoats.
You're also the PN spokesperson for Home Affairs.
It is also my duty to ensure that that happens, both as a spokesman and as a lawyer.
A government official who's charged with corruption.
Sorry?
Is it your duty as an opposition spokesperson to defend the government official?
It is my duty to ensure that this country, in its fight against corruption, does not create scapegoats. It is my duty to ensure, as a citizen of this country, and in whatever hat I am wearing, to ensure that those who are corrupt are brought to justice, irrespective of what the position they hold. And it is also my duty to ensure that we do not find little clerks, all right, and use them to pretend that we are fighting corruption. If we really want to fight corruption, let's actually go to who was giving those instructions in order to ensure that these tests and these theory tests are played around with in the way that we are hearing. That is the duty of all of us, and that is what I will continue doing, irrespective of what might happen or what people might feel that they wish to criticize me, where I'm duty-bound to do so.
But don't you feel you have a conflict of interest?
There is absolutely no conflict of interest, because you rise above it. Those people who think that there's a conflict of interest can't understand that you rise above situations. If we are not capable of rising above situations, then we are mediocre in the way that we are acting, and we are mediocre in the way that we are thinking. I would actually tell you that it's actually the contrary. Far from a conflict of interest. Conflict of interest would exist if we keep our mouth shut. Conflict of interest would exist if I do not ensure that justice is served on everyone, if I do not make statements to ensure that scapegoats are not there to protect others.
But how can we be sure, though, that you're speaking because as a politician who genuinely believes this is the case, and not as a lawyer who has a duty to help his client win the case?
No. If you let us be very clear on this. The situation is as clear as crystal for me. These perceived conflicts of interest are in your mind, from what I am understanding, for reasons because you are not capable to understand that people, me included, let me speak for myself, rise above all this. I can distinguish between one role and another, and I will keep on doing my utmost to ensure that I will carry out my responsibilities in the best way possible.
Okay, so in this case, allegedly a person was pressured to pass because he worked at a minister's villa. So this is someone at the very top of government. Do you know who the minister is?
No.
You have no information. Should this person resign?
Of course he should resign. Of course he should resign. My only worry is that I didn't manage to cross-examine because the case had to be adjourned, because that was going to be my first question. Then who is this minister? Have you sent for him? Have you spoken to him? Have you investigated him? These people are in the dock here. What have you done with those who have, therefore, according to you, acted in the way that you are maintaining? Oh, no, and of course he has to resign. And I'm going to make it a point to ensure that whoever was there actually is brought to justice, of course. Should we create scapegoats? Aren't you worried about the fact that you have a situation where we are creating scapegoats? Doesn't it annoy you? Doesn't it bother you?
Well, there are two ways to look at it, to be honest, because that's a fair point. But there's also the argument that a corrupt system can't work unless there are people.
And those are exactly our proposals. Law enforcement, beef them up, beef up our institutions. This is where we are lacking in this country, and this is the gist of the proposals that we put forward. The issue remains on beefing up our law enforcement agencies and beefing up then the institutions that have to, in actual fact, implement law enforcement.
In your meetings with people, with constituents. Do you feel any kind of public enthusiasm towards the PN?
Well, I mean, in the result of the last election was what it was. Clearly, after the election, the enthusiasm would have continued to wane down. People would feel disappointed with the result. People would feel lost. People would be asking themselves, "But how can we improve? What can we do?" So clearly, obviously, yes, the result would be that people are asking themselves, will the party get on its feet again? And my reply to them is, yes, of course. It is a process which has to go through. It is a long process. It is a difficult process. It will be done if we pull up our sleeves, all of us together, pull up our sleeves and work for one common aim. Just feeling lost means nothing. Just feeling lost will not solve anything. Just waning down in your enthusiasm will not get you anywhere. You have to roll up your sleeves, and the more difficult the times are, the harder you have to work.
Isn't it time for a massive shake-up though? So as in after your proposals, a number of people said you should be the person to lead the PN.
The Nationalist Party has a leader. We should all unite behind our leader. And if we continue discussing this rather than focusing on the way we have to regroup, reshape, we're not going to get anywhere. We have a leadership. There's no leadership issue at the moment. So please, let's stop discussing this and let us focus on what is more important. And what is more important is, in my role as Home Affairs spokesman, is that we have a country where law enforcement has collapsed. We have a country where we have a motivated police force. Are you happy with this? I am not.